All right, we are on to chapter 24, where we start getting into how new species are created and more importantly, what defines a species. So we talked about Hardy-Weinberg, and these are all the things that must occur in order for no evolution to happen. If any one of these 5 things occur, you have evolution, and we have the math to back it up. All right, so there's a lot of controversy with Darwin and evolution, but if you were to go back and look at his textbook, he never actually defines how new species came about. He just said we changed over time, but he didn't say how. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. But before we do that, what we need to do is define what a species is. All right. Give you a minute to look at that. Okay, so what is a species? And this was defined by Ernst Mayr, and he said it's basically a group of populations that have the possibility to interbreed. But what makes species separate, how you are a different species, is if you don't do this anymore. So, for example, the eastern meadowlark is located on the eastern side of the United States. The western meadowlark is on the west side, and because you've got the whole United States in between them, these guys do not interbreed just because there's too much space. So because they don't interbreed with each other, they are considered separate species. And over time, they've evolved where their pickup lines are totally different, how they behave. The whole mating ritual is completely different. And if we were to take them together and put them together now, because we humans have that technology, they would not interbreed. So again, to be considered the same species, you've got to be able to interbreed, and those offspring have to be able to produce offspring themselves. So not only can you have kids, you've got to be able to have grandkids as well. So how do we get new species? And there's a bunch of different things that can happen. Could start out with a population becoming isolated, geographically, reproductively, and because they're isolated, they do their own thing and end up changing. Figured out the volume. I muted it. So isolation is a great big proponent cause of speciation because you're off doing your own thing. Now, isolation, there can be 2 types, allopatric and sympatric. So allopatric, there is physically a barrier. Those 2 fish could not get together if they wanted to. Sympatric, they're in the same area, but there's something going on that whatever the brown fishes are doing, the blue fish, they're not, it's not their cup of tea, and they're not going to interbreed with them. So those are the 2 types of isolation. You could think of them as physical or behavioral. All right, so what we're going to start out is talking with things that prevent mating to occur in the first place. And these are why new species form, because You over in your little pocket and you do what you do, and they're over in their little pocket and they do what they do, and you are not combining genes, so you don't have that variation, so you stick with your variants. So let's start with geographical isolation. Usually the easiest one to understand, it's a physical isolation. You've got this little squirrel that lives on this side of the Grand Canyon, and you've got this little squirrel that lives on that side of the Grand Canyon, and you have this whole huge area in between them. They're not going to cross the Grand Canyon to go meet a lady. They're going to deal with the ladies they have there. So they have become two separate species because of geographic isolation, and given enough time, they could change their behaviors as well and look more different. Sorry. All right, so again, geographic isolation, you got a big old piece of earth in your way. So there's the first type of pre-zygotic barrier. These two can't get to each other, so they are not going to interbreed. Pre-zygotic, remember a zygote is when an egg and a sperm come together. And these 6 things we're going to be talking about are things that prevent the egg and sperm coming together. Second is ecological isolation. They're in the same area. They don't have the geography keeping them apart, but they live in different habitats. Think back to ecology, different biomes, different habitats that will still isolate them. So, for example, this snake here, one of them loves to hang out in the water, one of them loves to hang out on the land. They're literally right next to each other, but because the one doesn't come out of the water, it's never going to interbreed with the one that lives on the land. So that would be ecological, the ecology, the habitat isolation. You can interbreed lions and tigers. We've done it, made a liger or a tigon, and that all depends on who's the mom, who's the dad. They live in the same area of the planet, but because one hangs out in the grasslands and one hangs out in the rainforest, they don't interbreed. And then time passed, and now they're 2 different species. Again, if we put their egg and sperm together, we can make offspring, but it doesn't happen in nature because they just, they hang out on the top floor, the other one hangs out on the bottom floor, and nobody wants to go up the stairs. So there you go. So again, there's not a huge barrier geographically between them, but they have their little niche they like to hang out in, and they don't leave that. All right, so you could actually have, a lake between you. You could have, well, I just don't want to go over that side of the street. Or you could have the whole time issue, temporal isolation. They could be either times a day, times of year. And so when one wants to breed, the other one doesn't. So they're not, the egg and sperm's not going to come together. It is a pre-zygotic barrier. So as you can see from the 2 skunks here, the eastern versus western, they look pretty similar. And if we took an egg from one and a sperm from another, put it in a petri dish, we would make viable baby skunks. But because one likes to breed in the winter and one likes to breed in the summer, they're never going to come together in nature. And you can also kind of think of the reasoning why they are the way that they are. So the eastern guy is winter. The western guy is summer. And if you think about the east, when they breed in the winter, when are babies going to be born? In the spring, when the weather is very nice. Because on the eastern part, they actually get this stuff called snow. On the western part, they breed in the summer. They're going to give birth in the fall when temperatures are very nice out and they don't have to worry about the heat of the desert or the hotter west coast to deal with more additional problems to deal with. So again, you could have big piece of land in between you. You could just be in the same area but different locations, or you could be right next to each other but the timing is off. So all of these are types of prezygotic barriers. All right, so that leads to behavioral isolation, the fourth type. You guys are right next to each other. You don't have the earth blocking you. You're hanging out in the same location. You don't have those niches blocking you. You breed at the same time, so you don't have the time bothering you. But your pickup lines are completely different. So if you don't have the right pickup line, they're not going to breed with you. Prezygotic barrier.
It has certain, peculiarities. As you might tell from the name of the species itself, blue-footed boobies are no exception to this rule. Here in the Galapagos Islands, this pair of blue-footed boobies check each other out. Now, what is the most important quality the female looks for in a male? Good looks? A steady income? Beachfront property? Well, those are important, but they pale in comparison to having blue feet. Hence, this dance. The revelation of foot color, so that the female will not by mistake mate with a red-footed booby, or even a plaid-footed booby. Now, let's say,
All right, so, oops, let me get rid of this one. So behavioral. The blue-footed booby does a dance to show its blue feet. There are red-footed boobies, I think green-footed boobies, and this is why they don't interbreed with each other. The females want blue feet, and if the male doesn't show that blue feet, the female's not going to breed with them. And you see a lot of these mating rituals in every species. Birds are just some of the funniest ones. Let's watch another one.
This is Bulwer's pheasant, and he has got spectacular wattles. He's impressive enough when he's going about his normal business, but when she is around, he gets very excited indeed.
Ooh la la. Ooh la la. Female selection, female driving that behavior.
She is very critical. He's not good enough, it seems.
Aww.
Another pheasant, Temminck's Tragapan. His costume jewelry is even more elaborate. And if you've got it, why not flaunt it? The male monal pheasant impresses his female with a greater expanse of unbroken iridescence than is possessed by any other species.
And female-driven evolution. But it took a long time.
The Argus pheasant has the largest of all tail feathers, and wing feathers that are certainly as spectacular.
Boo.
And what can rival the train of a peacock? The costume put on specially for courtship dances by the African widow bird may not be quite as extravagant and unwieldy as those of the pheasants, but the widow bird displays by flying with his.
So they had to decide,
Hazardous business.
is it worth the
Exposing
cost?
yourself like this, even if you can fly, you're making yourself an easy target for a hawk, and there are many around on these grasslands in Kenya.
But they had to weigh the cost, and they determined it was worth the risk.
Additional makings the male gets from displaying in this dangerous fashion make the risk worthwhile.
So again, there are many different types of mating rituals out there. And part of the purpose of the mating ritual is for species to recognize their own kind. So this is going to lead to them only reproducing with their own kind. So that is reproductive isolation. Hold on, I'm checking myself because there's something I wanted to tell you. All right. So again, just not the right pickup lines. And again, being able to recognize your own species is a very important ability. Insects do it. It may not be by their visual appearance, but by the sounds they make. You can look up various different types of insects mating calls, and they're all different, and it's a way for them to recognize your own species. All right, another one is mechanical isolation. And that's where, well, tab A doesn't fit into slot B. It's the wrong shape. So pollen, if you were to look at pollen under a magnifying glass, so let's pull some, not magnifying glass, I'm sorry, microscope. Let's do pollen microscope. So you can see pollen comes in various different shapes. And I know we didn't talk about it much here in class, but pollen is basically plant sperm. So if these don't have the right shape, they're not going to fertilize the egg, because you change the shape, you change the function. So different species of dragonflies, or some people call them damselflies, by having penises that are different shapes, that's going to prevent, because, you know, tab A, can't fit into slot B, it's not going to work. Oops. There's a series on YouTube called Green Porno, put on by a very, award-winning actress.
I would have come and I would see upwards, downwards, forwards, backwards. I would have a slim body. I would have translucent, transparent wings. At the end of my slender body, I would have a pair of clasping organs. I would find a female, and I would grab her with them by the neck. She would twist the body to get to my genital pouch. At first, I would clean her vagina to make sure she would only have my babies. Then we would copulate. When finished, I don't let her go. I would drag her where I wanted to lay our eggs, then release her.
Dragonflies are little nasty creatures, but you thought they were cute. But again, it's got to have the right shape. Tab A don't fit into slot B. You're going to have what's called mechanical isolation. So hopefully you're noticing we're getting more and more specific on what defines a species, or what can lead to what defines a species. All right, so let's go through them all. Let's say you don't have a big mountain in front between you. You don't care about the niches, about the high ground or the low ground. You guys go through your breeding season at the same time. Hey, maybe even some similar behaviors. And it's the right shape. What could be left? Well, that's gametic isolation. Okay, you might have the right tab A to fit into slot B, but the sperm aren't the right shape or don't have the right signal to penetrate the egg. So there's two ways that could happen. You could have a biochemical barrier where, again, it's not the right shape, so that sperm can slam against that egg and it's never getting in. Doesn't have the right key. Or chemical incompatibility, which means it never gets to the egg in the first place. Okay, yep, the sperm's been deposited into the tract, but because of the pH or chemicals or whatever that's in that tract, it destroys the sperm before it even gets to the egg. So this example of this is how sea urchins reproduce. So let's look at the video. Here's the sea urchin.
All alone in a vast emptiness. A baby sea urchin, a Pluvius. Blind and deaf, its sole purpose is to find the right place to land. Here's what it'll become: an adult sea urchin, basically a rugged ball of spines, built to survive some of the harshest environments of the ocean. Like their cousins, the sea stars and sand dollars, sea urchins have little tube feet. They use them to move around and pull kelp into their mouths. And between their spines are pincers called pedicellariae that they use to groom themselves. Each spring, males release clouds of sperm, and females release huge numbers of eggs. A tiny percentage of them find each other in the open ocean. The fertilized egg grows and eventually hatches. An embryo swims for its life. As it grows, it takes on the shape of a little lunar lander. It can swim for weeks or months like this, covering huge distances, feeding on algae along the way. Meanwhile, a microscopic adult urchin is growing inside its own teenage self. The Pluteus needs to land somewhere before the adult inside it grows too big. The ocean currents drag it toward shore and into the pounding surf. That turbulence, plus the smell of tasty kelp, lets the Pluteus know it's time. It stops swimming. It falls to the seafloor. Then something really weird happens. From inside, 2 feet reach out. It pulls itself inside out like a sock. Here's a sand dollar doing the same thing. A miniature adult emerges. And then, after so much change and tumult, time kind of stands still. Unless an urchin is eaten or gets sick, it can grow for centuries. Having survived the long odds of youth, it's now practically immortal.
All right. So, again, what I wanted you to get out of that one was about how they just release the sperm, and if they don't mesh, if they've got that biochemical barrier, they're not going to come together for sea urchins. All right, so those are the 6 things that prevent a sperm and an egg from coming together. You've got your geographic barrier, your ecological barrier, your temporal barrier, your behavioral barrier, your mechanical barrier, or your gametic barrier. Ooh, excuse me. So those things are what starts out defining a species. If they don't breed, they are 2 distinct species. Now, why don't they breed is usually one of those 6 barrier isolation reasons. Now, there are a few more that occur. Yes, breeding does occur. Sperm and egg do come together, but they are still considered separate species. And those are called post-reproduction barriers. And yes, they mated, they bred, the sperm fertilized the egg, but the children do not become, they don't go through puberty, they don't grow up and have children of their own. So, the 3 types of post-zygotic barriers are reduced hybrid viability, reduced hybrid fertility, and hybrid breakdown. So these are the 3 post-reproductive barriers. So again, they've conquered those first pre-zygotic barriers. Sperm and egg came together, but it's not going to be a good thing. So let's start out with reduced hybrid viability. Yes, the sperm and egg came together. Yes, the offspring was born, but the child does not go through puberty. The child doesn't mature, does not have children of its own. And depending on the species, again, like for example, the salamander here, it's very frail. It dies off very quickly. And it's, it never has kids of its own. Now, reduced hybrid viability versus reduced hybrid fertility. These ones, the hybrids might be not frail. might be pretty, well, the example here is if you take a horse and you combine it with a donkey, you get a mule. Mules are very sturdy. They're great work animals, but they're sterile. They cannot have offspring of their own. So that's hybrid fertility, is the kids can't have kids. And the main thing here is, we took 32 chromosomes, 31 there, and the mules have 63. And that's just, it's an odd number. You can't do meiosis to an odd number. It's not going to lead to a good day. So, what that extra chromosome does is it makes it so they don't, they are sterile. They are shooting blanks. Oops, sorry. So again, having that extra chromosome is a bad thing. The third way is hybrid breakdown. Okay, so the kids are okay. The kids are all right. And they have grandkids. But the grandkids are sterile or feeble, or that stuff that we described for that first one, the hybrid viability. So you might get a generation or two, but that's about it. And we are seeing this with rice. When we first started mixing different rice species together, the first generation, the F1s as we call them, were great. And it was the F2s that were not so good. So you've got your parentals. The kids are your F1s. They were good. But that when you mix them together to make your F2s, that's when they were bad. So how fast do we get a new species? And there's pretty much two big theories about how fast this occurs. There's gradualism and there's punctuated equilibrium. And these are the gentlemen that pushed that theory about how long does it take to get a new species. Gradualism, well, what do you know? It's gradually. And this one, if we go a long time, is going to be a lot different than that one. And hopefully we'll, change over time. There we go. Versus punctuated occurs really quickly. So, yes, time-wise, between the original and the new one, it's the same amount of time, but it suddenly changed, well, actually, technically, a lot less time because it changed right there. And it just, happened in bursts. And then there's long periods where little of no change. And when we look at the fossil record, what we see is both. Some species are gradual, some species are punctuated. And it just, what happened at the time. So, Stephen Jay Gould was the one who came up with this punctuated. It happened quickly, and then nothing happened for a while. And then something quickly happened, and then nothing for a while. And yeah, he had a lot of books. He is kind of famous. So, those are what you want to get out of this chapter so far are the 8 things that distinguish species. I'm sorry, 9 things. We've got the 6 prezygotic barriers, what happens from that egg, what keeps that egg and sperm from fertilizing to begin with. And then we have the 3 post-zygotic barriers, is when the egg and sperm did come together, but the offspring, well, they're not biologically fit. In the long run, you're not going to continue this line. So that leads to different species then can evolve, adapt to their environment, or, you've got environmental selection driving evolution, you've got the females driving evolution, and another big topic, another big point is that we're not trying to evolve better. I'd love to, have my great-great-grandkids have wings and fly. I'd love to get that goal, but evolution doesn't work that way. It's not goal-oriented. It's what works at the time survives. So when we talk about cellular respiration, photosynthesis, could there be a better way to do it? And the answer is absolutely. But if it ain't broke, we're not going to fix it. It's not about survival of the fittest. It's about survival of what worked at the time. This was good enough for me to make it, so this is good enough to go. And when it comes to humans, again, remember, for humans, when we're talking about evolution, why haven't humans evolved a lot in the last few years? And, well, the answer is actually we have. Our wisdom teeth, people aren't being born with them anymore because, well, they're kind of a vestigial organ now. We don't need them. Our canine teeth are getting much less pointed compared to hundreds of years ago because we don't need to tear the flesh to eat it. We have knives and softer food, so our environment is selecting against them. Now, those could be counteracted, by sexual selection. If the females decide pointy teeth are cool and we want those, in the next couple hundred years, you would see more pointier teeth coming around. But again, we're not going to evolve unless something drives the process. Any questions? Write them down on your Post-it note. Bring them into class tomorrow. The next section of the notes, you have them on your handout. I'm not going to really talk about them too much, is because they maybe ask one question, and I don't think it's worth the time. But you have the slides that kind of go over where life, what is life and how did it get here, which in bio honors was kind of a big deal, but for AP Bio, it's more of they assumed you already know that. So if you need to review, again, what you want to make sure you know is what do we define as life? So again, a rock is not alive because it doesn't have cells. If you get it wet, it doesn't do anything. Doesn't have any sort of diffusion, osmosis, cell communication, nothing going, well, it doesn't have cells to go inside. It doesn't grow bigger, doesn't need energy, and it doesn't change. So make sure you know what defines life. And those other ones too. We've got the 3 major hypotheses of where life came from. What they will test you on, what you want to make sure you know is the spontaneous abiotic origin, because that's the one most scientists lead to. Unless you watch the History Channel, then you know it's extraterrestrial origin. All right, so again, the rest of the slides kind of talk about the chemistry, how these atoms came together, and instead of being just plain atoms, turned into more complex molecules. So we started as just atoms, then amino acids showed up, and we have reproduced this in the lab. We can give it the spark of life and make the amino acids show up. So again, and those can come together. These are the, hopefully you recognize these. These are kind of the basis of DNA and proteins. And all these things had to be together first before we could get even more complicated. So take a peek at the rest of the chapter. Make sure you know what defines life. That whole, abiotic theory. And then you can just look at these notes that kind of talk about, that show how we start just over time becoming more complex and complex organisms. And again, we can see that in the fossil record. Fossil record and just geography, the geographical, is that the right word? The rock layers also can support all of this. So come up with your questions. Again, endosymbiosis, we talked about that in the cell unit, where mitochondria and chloroplasts came from. This, like the Cambrian explosion, the Precambrian, Paleozoic, Mesozoic, Cenozoic, you don't need to know any of those. If they include that in there, it'll probably be a picture like this and a big passage to read, and then you have to interpret the table or the graph or whatever using that information. But if you know how to interpret a graph, how to read a graph, how to read a data table, you will be just fine. So again, if they were to give you this graph, can you read it? You don't have to memorize anything about it, but if you can read the graph, you are fine. Okay. All right. So again, leading again in the timeline till we get to modern mammals. And you should have these again. These ones right here you don't need to memorize. They've given them as examples, but nothing of testing your knowledge on them. All right. If you have any questions about what defines life, the origin of life on Earth, bring them to class tomorrow. See you later.